What makes good people do bad things? It's one of those huge questions, isn't it? Something that, well, philosophers, psychologists, pretty much all of us
Hmm.
have wrestled with for ages.
It really is. And we often jump to conclusions thinking, okay, there must be something wrong with that person. The bad apple theory.
Right. We look for the flaw inside the individual. Bad people do bad things. Simple. But what if it's not always that simple? What if the situation, the actual environment we're dropped into, has this massive power to, well, change us, sometimes in really disturbing ways?
That is precisely the fascinating and frankly often chilling idea we're diving into today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of psychology's most famous studies, also maybe one of its most controversial, the Stanford Prison Experiment.
Yep. And we'll also look at how it massively influenced Philip Zimbardo's later concept of the Lucifer effect, which is really his theory trying to explain how good, ordinary people can, well, turn towards evil.
So our mission today is to really unpack this whole thing. We'll look at why Zimbardo started the experiment in the first place, what actually happened, which was pretty shocking, and then all the criticisms that have piled up over the years, because there are a lot.
Definitely. And then we'll connect it to how Zimbardo took those initial ideas and broadened them out into this bigger theory about human behavior. He used real-world stuff, like the abuses at Abu Ghraib, as this really stark, kind of visceral parallel.
Our goal here is to try and make sense of some pretty complex psychological ideas. We'll give you clear definitions, especially if maybe you're new to thinking about this stuff. We want to help you understand why these concepts, from the 70s, are still incredibly relevant today.
Absolutely. Get ready for maybe a few aha moments, or perhaps some uncomfortable ones too, as we unpack just how deeply our environment can shape who we are, or maybe who we become. It's about understanding that tug of war, between our own choices and those powerful external forces.
Okay, let's unpack this. All right, so to start this deep dive, let's set the scene. We need to go back, way back to the early 1970s.
Right.
And we're talking about a psychologist, Philip Zimbardo. Respected guy. And interestingly, he was actually a former high school classmate of Stanley Milgram.
Oh, wow. The Milgram from the obedience studies.
The very same. So Zimbardo knew about Milgram's work on obedience to authority, and he wanted to sort of build on it, but maybe look at it from a slightly different angle. He was wrestling with this big question.
That's a really important starting point. Milgram showed us how easily people follow orders from authority figures, even, when it means hurting someone or thinking they are, with those fake shocks.
Yeah, shocking stuff. Literally.
Right. So Milgram focused on authority. Zimbardo shifted the focus a bit. He wondered, okay, what happens if you take perfectly healthy, normal people, psychologically sound college students, and you put them in a simulated prison? Would their behavior just completely change based on the role they were assigned, prisoner or guard?
So would the situation itself, the role, the environment, just completely overpower their personality, who they were before they walked in?
Exactly. Would the situation override their disposition? And this brings us to a really key distinction in psychology, especially useful if you're just kind of getting into these ideas. When we talk about what drives behavior, psychologists often break it down into two main types of variables. Can you walk us through those, just so we're all clear?
Sure. Think of it simply. You've got situational variables and dispositional variables. Situational variables are all the things outside of us. Factors in the environment, the context, like the prison settings Zimbardo created, the uniforms, the assigned role of guard or prisoner, the rules. It's the stuff around you influencing how you act.
Okay, the external stuff. Makes sense.
And then the flip side is dispositional variables. These are the internal things, your personality traits, your individual characteristics. Are you naturally kind, aggressive? What's your personal moral compass like? Your values, your beliefs. That's all dispositional. It's the stuff inside you.
Got it. Inside versus outside.
Exactly. And Zimbardo's big bet, his hypothesis, was that in this powerful prison situation, the situational variables, the outside stuff, would basically crush the dispositional traits. That even good, stable people would start acting, well, badly, or at least totally out of character because the situation demanded it.
Okay, so with that framework, situation versus disposition, let's get into how Zimbardo actually built this simulated hell. Where did this happen?
Well, the location itself is kind of creepy. It was literally in the basement of Stanford University's psychology building, Jordan Hall. They converted a hallway down there into a mock prison.
And it wasn't just like some tape on the floor. They really went for it, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. They built 3 small cells, about 6 by 9 feet, meant to hold 3 prisoners each. really cramped.
Claustrophobic?
Totally. There was a narrow corridor they used as a sort of prison yard. A tiny windowless closet became the solitary confinement room, and they called it the hole. Super ominous.
Oh, the whole...
And then across from the cells, there was a bigger area for the guards, and the warden, who was Zimbardo himself, acting in that role. And of course, hidden cameras and microphones everywhere to catch everything that happened. The whole environment was designed to feel oppressive, inescapable.
So they built the stage.
Yeah.
How did they find the actors for this psychological drama?
Recruitment was pretty standard for the time, actually. A newspaper ad.
Really? Just an ad?
Yep. It asked for male college students needed for a psychological study of prison life, and it offered $15 a day.
$15, which, adjusted for inflation today, is roughly, what, like $116? Decent pay for a student back then.
Definitely. So about 75 guys responded, but they didn't just take anyone. They put them through some serious screening.
Ah, okay. So they were looking for a specific type of person.
Exactly. They were super selective. They picked only 24 out of the 75.
Yeah.
And here's the crucial part.
Yeah.
They chose them specifically because they were judged to be the most normal and healthy.
Normal and healthy. How did they determine that?
Through psychological tests and interviews. They screened out anyone with a criminal background, any history of psychological problems or significant medical issues. Zimbardo wanted, or claimed he wanted, a baseline of psychologically stable, well-adjusted young men.
Right. So you could argue later that any bad behavior wasn't because these guys were already messed up. He wanted to eliminate the bad apple explanation right from the start.
Precisely. And then, those final 24 were randomly assigned roles. A coin toss, basically. Half became prisoners, half became guards.
And that random assignment is absolutely critical, scientifically speaking.
Why is that?
Because if you randomly assign people, you can be much more confident that the two groups, guards and prisoners, started out roughly the same, on average. Any differences in behavior that emerged later are less likely to be because the groups were different to begin with, and more likely because of the roles they were assigned. It strengthens his argument that the situation was the cause.
Gotcha. So random assignment was key to isolating the power of the situation over personality.
Yeah.
Okay, so they had the setting, they had the participants. Now, the rules of the game, the roles and procedures, because this is where things started to blur, wasn't it? And fast.
Oh, incredibly fast. And the way they set up these roles and procedures was absolutely designed to create a certain psychological state. The day before the study even started, the guys assigned as guards had this orientation session.
What did that involve?
They got uniforms, khaki shirts and pants, military surplus style. They got wooden batons, not for hitting, but as symbols of power and control. And maybe the most psychologically potent part, mirrored sunglasses.
Ah, mirrored sunglasses.
Yeah.
Why were those so important? They come up a lot in discussions of this.
Because they prevent eye contact. They create this barrier, this sense of anonymity. It makes the guard feel less like an individual person looking at another individual person and more like an impersonal symbol of authority. It also makes it harder for the prisoners to read the guard's emotions or intentions.
And this ties into that psychological concept you mentioned, de-individuation. Can you break that down for us simply? For anyone maybe hearing it for the first time.
Sure. De-individuation. It sounds complicated, but it's basically what happens when people feel less like their unique selves and more like anonymous members of a group. Think about being in a massive crowd or wearing a mask or, yes, a uniform and mirrored sunglasses.
Okay.
When you feel anonymous, your personal inhibitions can drop. You might feel less responsible for your actions because, no one knows it's me. You might do things you wouldn't normally do if you felt identifiable and accountable.
So the uniform, the glasses, they were tools to make the guards feel less like individual students and more like generic guards.
Exactly, to strip away their personal identity and immerse them in the role. It's a powerful thing. We see it online with anonymous comments or in mob behavior. It's this idea that anonymity can unleash darker impulses by reducing personal accountability.
And then came the instructions for these guards. This is where it gets murky and, well, dangerous.
Very murky. They were explicitly told not to use physical violence, no hitting, no withholding food or drink. That was the stated boundary.
Okay, clear line there.
But they were told to maintain law and order. They were told to make the prisoners feel like they were really in prison, to induce feelings of boredom, maybe fear, a sense of powerlessness, arbitrariness. It was this really ambiguous mandate.
Yeah.
Control them psychologically, make them feel imprisoned, but don't physically hurt them. A very tricky line to walk.
Yeah, sounds like a recipe for interpretation and abuse.
You could say that. And while the guards got this orientation, the prisoner's introduction was designed for maximum shock and immediate status degradation. This process is sometimes called identity stripping.
Right, it started with a complete surprise, didn't it? They weren't just told to show up.
Not at all. The guys assigned as prisoners had no idea they were going to be arrested. Real Palo Alto police officers cooperating with the study showed up at their homes or dorms, sometimes unexpectedly, and conducted these mock arrests.
Oh, real cops.
Real cops, real police cars, sirens sometimes. They charged them with felonies like armed robbery or burglary, read them their rights, handcuffed them in public, took them to the station, fingerprinted them, took mugshots, the whole 9 yards.
Imagine that. You're just a college kid, you signed up for a study, and suddenly you're being arrested like a real criminal in front of your neighbors. The psychological impact must have been immediate. Shock, confusion, fear.
Absolutely. It was designed to make it feel terrifyingly real from moment one, to induce that sense of powerlessness and submission right away. And the humiliation didn't stop there. When they got to the mock prison in the basement,
What happened then?
more rituals. They were strip searched, which is inherently degrading. Then they were deloused with some kind of spray, again, symbolic, treating them like they're dirty or infested.
Dehumanizing.
Totally. Then they were given these ill-fitting smocks or dresses to wear with no underwear. Think about that. It's emasculating, uncomfortable, makes you feel vulnerable. They had to wear stocking caps over their hair, further removing individuality. And a light chain was locked around one ankle, a constant physical reminder of their confinement.
But the most crucial step in stripping away their identity, maybe the most psychologically insidious part, was the numbers, right?
Absolutely critical. Each prisoner was assigned a number, and they were told explicitly that the guards would only refer to them by their number, never by name. You are number 861, number 819, step forward.
So your name, your core identity, is just erased within this system. You become interchangeable, just a number.
Precisely. It's a classic technique used in total institutions, prisons, military boot camps to break down individual identity and enforce conformity and subordination. You're no longer John or Michael, you're inmate, #734.
So the whole setup, from the arrest to the numbers, was meticulously designed to create this intense psychological environment where roles might just take over.
That was the goal. Zimbardo and his team wanted to see how quickly this transformation would happen. And, well, results were alarmingly quick and brutal.
And swift is the word. This whole thing only lasted 6 days, right? Not the planned 2 weeks.
Yeah.
The descent into hostility was incredibly rapid.
It really was. Day 1, day 2. The guards didn't just ease into it. They started asserting their authority pretty much immediately. But the prisoners didn't just roll over either initially.
No, there's pushback.
Yeah, there was an early rebellion. Some prisoners ripped off their numbers, barricaded themselves in their cells using their beds, shouted insults at the guards. They were resisting the roles being forced on them.
And how did the guards handle that resistance?
Harshly. This is where you see the power dynamic really solidify. The guards saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to their authority. They reacted by blasting the prisoners with freezing cold CO2 from fire extinguishers to force them out.
Fire extinguishers. Wow.
Yeah. Then they stripped the prisoners naked, took away their beds and blankets, leaving them to sleep on the cold concrete floor. The ringleaders were thrown into the hole. This wasn't just a minor scuffle. It was a decisive power play that set the tone. It showed the prisoners very clearly that resistance would be met with punishment, and the guards were fully in control.
And from there, the abuse just escalated. It wasn't just about maintaining order anymore.
It seemed to morph pretty quickly into something more sadistic, more inventive in its cruelty. The guards started making prisoners do push-ups, often arbitrarily, sometimes forcing other prisoners to sit on their backs while they did them.
Humiliating.
Absolutely. They restricted bathroom access, making prisoners wait hours, sometimes refusing entirely, forcing them to use buckets inside their cells, and then they wouldn't let them empty the buckets, leaving the cells stinking of urine and feces.
Oh, that's horrific. Just deliberate degradation.
It really seems that way. And one guard in particular, the one they nicknamed John Wayne, because he apparently adopted this southern accent and swagger.
David Eshelman, later identified.
Right, Eshelman. He himself later acknowledged, quite chillingly, that he was purposefully devising ways to demean the prisoners. He wanted to create mental anguish. He even admitted to instructing prisoners to simulate sodomy on each other. That goes way beyond just maintaining order.
Yeah, that's crossing a line into outright psychological torture.
Yeah.
What was happening to the prisoners psychologically during all this?
The toll was immense and immediate for some. Prisoner 8612 Douglas Corpy had what looked like a complete mental breakdown after only 36 hours.
36 hours. That's barely a day and a half.
Exactly. There's audio tape of him screaming, "Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. Don't you know? I want to get out. I can't stand another night. I just can't take it anymore." He was hyperventilating, crying, clearly in acute distress. He had to be released early.
And he wasn't the only one who broke down, was he?
No. Prisoner 819 also had a breakdown. He was crying uncontrollably. A priest had come to visit the prison, and 819 refused to talk to him, just sobbed. And what's really disturbing is how the guards then manipulated the other prisoners against him.
How's...
They got the other prisoners lined up outside his cell to start chanting loudly and repeatedly, "Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing," because he was breaking down and refusing to cooperate.
Oh my God. Using peer pressure as a weapon.
Collective shaming. He became so distraught, Zimbardo had to intervene. But initially, Zimbardo tried to remind him he was prisoner 819, trying to keep him in the role, even as he was clearly falling apart. It shows how deep the roles went.
And what of the Zimbardo himself? He wasn't just the researcher observing from behind glass, right? He gave himself a role, too.
That's a crucial and highly criticized part of this. He wasn't just the principal investigator. He cast himself as the prison superintendent. He was inside the simulation, overseeing the guards, making decisions about the prison's operation.
And he admits he got lost in that role.
He does. By his own account later, he lost his scientific objectivity. He became so absorbed in maintaining the reality of the prison, dealing with guard shifts and prisoner rebellions, that he failed to see the escalating abuse for what it was. He wasn't thinking like a researcher responsible for his participants' welfare. He was thinking like a superintendent trying to keep his prison running. He even mentioned trying to convince Corpy not to leave during his breakdown, initially seeing it as a problem for the prison rather than a sign the experiment needed to stop.
So it sounds like he needed someone from the outside to snap him out of it.
Pretty much. And that person was Christina Maslach, a fellow psychologist, his then girlfriend, who later became his wife. She came down to observe, and she was horrified.
She hadn't been involved day to day.
No. So she had fresh eyes, she saw the degradation, the guards' behavior, and she directly confronted Zimbardo. She basically asked him, "What are you doing to these boys?" And she challenged his own transformation, how absorbed and detached he seemed. Around the same time, some parents who visited also started raising serious concerns about their son's conditions.
So it was that outside perspective, Maslach's ethical outrage, combined with the parental complaints, that finally pulled the plug.
Yes. That combination finally broke through Zimbardo's immersion in the superintendent role. He realized how far things had gone. The experiment was stopped abruptly after only 6 days, not the planned 14.
6 days. And the level of distress and abuse reached just shows how powerful that situation became, how quickly.
Incredibly quickly. And that early termination is really the first huge red flag signaling just how ethically compromised this study was, even by the standards of the time.
Yeah, that early end, driven by just how bad things got, it immediately throws up massive ethical questions, doesn't it? The SPE quickly became this, poster child for unethical research.
Absolutely. It's probably one of the most frequently cited examples in psychology textbooks and ethics courses of what not to do. It violated several ethical principles that are now firmly established, partly because of studies like this and Milgram's. The standards we have today, enforced by institutional review boards, or IRBs, this study wouldn't even get past the proposal stage.
So what were the specific ethical violations? Looking back now, what stands out?
Well, several major ones. First, lack of fully informed consent. Big time. Yes, they consented to a study on prison life, but they were not told they'd be subjected to a surprise, realistic arrest by actual police.
Right. That crossed a line.
Definitely. It breached the terms they agreed to and caused immediate unforeseen distress. Second, participant abuse. The prisoners endured severe psychological harm, intense anxiety, emotional breakdowns, humiliation, degrading treatment. The risk of harm was clearly foreseeable or became obvious very quickly and wasn't adequately managed or stopped soon enough.
And the debriefing wasn't great either, was it?
No, that's the third point. Lack of appropriate debriefing. Proper ethical practice requires immediate debriefing after a study, especially one involving stress or deception. Participants need help processing the experience, understanding the purpose, and ensuring they leave without lasting harm. Zimbardo did hold debriefing sessions, but they were years later in some cases. Memories fade, the immediate impact isn't addressed. It just wasn't adequate by modern standards. Waiting years is just too long to effectively mitigate potential harm.
And there's also this more recent criticism about the experimenters themselves. possible influencing the guard's behavior. That adds another ethical layer.
Exactly. This is a huge one. Evidence has emerged, particularly from analyzing the archives, suggesting that Zimbardo and his research assistants may have actively encouraged the guards to be tough, perhaps even subtly directing specific abusive behaviors. If that's true, it's not just about observing situational effects, it's about the researchers creating the abusive situation. That blurs the line between observer and instigator, which is a serious ethical compromise and also undermines the scientific claims.
Wow. So the backlash and the ethical fallout from the SBE were significant drivers in establishing the stricter rules we have for psychological research today.
Undeniably, studies like the SPE and Milgram were wake-up calls. They led directly to the formal creation of ethics committees, IRBs in the U.S., and strict guidelines from bodies like the American Psychological Association. These rules mandate informed consent, minimize harm, ensure confidentiality, require timely debriefing, and generally protect the rights and welfare of human participants in research. Things have changed dramatically because of experiments like this.
Okay, so the ethics are clearly problematic. But what about the science itself? Even putting ethics aside for a moment, can we actually trust the conclusions Zimbardo drew? How scientifically valid was it?
That's where the debate gets really fierce, and it's still ongoing. Beyond ethics, the scientific validity is heavily questioned. One major issue is generalizability. Meaning, can you generalize the findings from this specific group to other people? The participants were mostly white, middle-class, male college students from Stanford. That's a pretty narrow slice of humanity. Would the same thing happen with women, or older people, or people from different cultural backgrounds or socioeconomic statuses? We don't know. It makes it hard to claim this reveals a universal truth about human nature.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's this idea of ecological validity. That sounds technical. What does it mean in simple terms, and why is it a critique here?
Right. Ecological validity basically asks, how realistic was the simulation? How well does the experimental setup, the mock prison in the basement, actually mirror a real-world situation, like an actual prison?
And the argument is it wasn't very realistic.
The argument is that it's impossible to perfectly replicate the complexities, the long-term realities, the genuine lack of control experienced in a real prison. The participants knew, on some level, they were in an experiment. They knew they could eventually leave. Real prisoners don't have that knowledge. So critics argued the behavior observed might have been specific to that artificial kind of theatrical setting and not necessarily reflective of how people behave in actual total institutions. The ecology of the basement prison was just different from a real one.
Okay. And another big challenge to the idea that people just naturally slipped into roles is this concept of demand characteristics. What's that about?
This is a really crucial one. Demand characteristics are cues in an experiment that might tip off participants about what the researchers expect or hope to find. And when participants pick up on these cues, consciously or unconsciously, they might change their behavior to match those expectations.
So they're not acting naturally, they're kind of performing, playing the role they think the researchers want.
Exactly. They might think, okay, this is a study about prison. I'm a guard, so I guess I'm supposed to act tough. Or I'm a prisoner, I should act oppressed or rebellious. They act out their stereotyped views of the role to help the study or fulfill what they perceive as its purpose.
And if that happened in the SPE, it fundamentally challenges Zimbardo's whole conclusion, right? It means the behavior wasn't just a spontaneous reaction to the situation.
Precisely. It suggests the participants might have been influenced by their own ideas about how guards and prisoners should act in a psychology experiment, rather than simply being overwhelmed by the situational forces. It introduces this element of performance or compliance with perceived expectations.
Is there actual evidence that demand characteristics were at play?
Yes, quite a bit has come out over the years. Remember prisoner 8612, Douglas Corpy, the one who had the breakdown after 36 hours?
Yeah, the screaming on the tape.
Well, decades later, in 2017, he gave an interview claiming he faked that breakdown.
Faked it. Why?
He said he mainly wanted to get out of the experiment so he could study for his GRE exams. He realized pleading wouldn't work, so he decided to act crazy to force them to release him. Now, Zimbardo disputes this, but if Corpy's telling the truth, it blows a huge hole in the idea that his distress was a genuine product of the situation.
Wow, that's a very different story. Any other evidence?
Other participants in later interviews have also admitted they consciously altered their behavior, sometimes trying to give the researchers what they wanted. And then there's the work of Thibault Letexier, a French researcher.
What did he find?
In 2019, he published a major critique after digging deep into the SPE archives, audio recordings, notes, everything. He argued pretty strongly that the guards weren't just spontaneously becoming brutal. He found evidence suggesting the experimenters, including Zimbardo's research assistant, actively coached the guards, telling them they needed to be tougher, giving them ideas, pushing them towards harsher behavior to get the results Zimbardo expected.
So direct instructions, not just passive observation.
Letexier's interpretation points that way. He suggests the guards were giving much more explicit direction than Zimbardo initially let on, essentially being guided towards fulfilling the hypothesis.
And didn't the consultant, the ex-convict, say something similar?
Yes, Carlo Prescott. He consulted on the experiment's design, drawing on his own experiences in San Quentin. Years later, in 2005, he wrote an article claiming he told the researchers about specific tactics used in real prisons, and he believed the guards couldn't have come up with some of their more inventive cruelties without being explicitly told about them. He felt his own experiences were basically fed to the guards as a script. This was also echoed by historian Rutger Bregman, who argued guards were actively urged towards aggression.
Man, all of this really casts doubt on the spontaneous transformation narrative.
It certainly complicates it enormously. It suggests that experimenter influence and participant expectations might have played a much larger role than acknowledged.
And there's even a critique about who signed up in the first place, right? That the ad itself might have attracted a certain type of person.
Yes, that's the selection bias argument raised by Carnahan and McFarlane in 2007. They did a clever study. They ran two different ads. One similar to Zimbardo's, mentioning a psychological study of prison life, and another just advertising a generic psychological study.
And they found differences in who responded.
Big differences. The people who responded to the prison life ads scored significantly higher on personality scales, measuring things like aggression, authoritarianism, liking hierarchy and control, Machiavellianism, being manipulative, social dominance, and narcissism. And they scored lower on empathy and altruism.
So the very act of advertising a prison study might have self-selected people who were already, maybe, a bit more inclined towards the kinds of behavior seen in the experiment.
That's the implication. It challenges Zimbardo's claim that he started with a group of completely normal, average, healthy participants randomly assigned. If the pool of applicants was already skewed towards certain traits, then the random assignment might not have created truly equivalent groups. It suggests a possible interaction between disposition, pre-existing traits, and situation, rather than just the situation alone being all-powerful.
Okay, so given this barrage of criticism, ethical, scientific, methodological, how has Zimbardo responded? He must have spent decades defending this study.
He absolutely has, and very vigorously. He often dismisses critics like Letexier, calling their arguments ad hominem, attacking him personally rather than the data, and claims they ignore evidence that contradicts their points. For instance, he strongly disputes Corpy's claim of faking the breakdown, believing Corpy is lying now to discredit the study. He also denied that Prescott actually wrote the critical article attributed to him. Zimbardo's core position remains unchanged. Despite any flaws, the experiment's central message holds true. Powerful situations, bad barrels can drastically shape behavior, making good people do bad things, and sometimes making others heroic. He insists the main takeaway about situational power is still valid.
It's a conclusion he's really stuck to. But what about other attempts to study this? Has anyone tried to replicate it, maybe addressing some of the criticisms? I know there's that BBC prison study.
Yes, the BBC prison study from 2002, led by psychologists Alex Haslam and Steve Riker. That's a really important counterpoint. They did a partial replication, male participants, mock prison, filmed for TV. But crucially, they tried to address the experimenter influence issue.
Oh.
The guards were not given specific instructions on how to behave. They were just told to manage the prison effectively. The researchers deliberately took a hands-off approach regarding guard conduct.
And what happened? Did it turn out like Stanford?
Not at all. The results were dramatically different. In the BBC study, the prisoners actually became more assertive over time, challenging the guards' authority. The guards, lacking clear instructions, strong leadership, or a shared sense of purpose and identity about how to be guards, really struggled. They didn't coalesce into a brutal, cohesive unit.
So they didn't automatically become tyrants.
No, far from it. They became increasingly divided, stressed, and ineffective. Some were very uncomfortable with wielding power. Eventually, the power structure kind of collapsed. The study ended early, not because of guard brutality, but because the system broke down and the participants actually considered forming a more communal, egalitarian system, though that failed too.
Wow. So what did Haslam and Riker conclude from that?
Their conclusion was quite different from Zimbardo's. They argued it's not just about passively conforming to roles, it's about social identity and leadership. Tyranny doesn't just happen, it often requires leaders actively promoting a shared sense of us, the guards, versus them, the prisoners, and justifying harsh actions. Without that strong leadership and shared identity pushing them towards oppression, the guards in their study floundered. It questioned the idea of a simple, mindless slip into roles.
How did Zimbardo take these findings? It seems like a direct challenge.
Initially, he was critical, suggesting the BBC setup was more like a reality TV show, maybe encouraging performance. But something really interesting happened later. In 2018, Zimbardo, Riker, and Haslam actually issued a joint statement.
Really, the opposing researchers.
Yes. It was quite remarkable, a sign of real scientific dialogue. They acknowledged that both studies offered valid insights. They agreed that behavior in these situations is complex. It's influenced by more than just the situation alone. Leadership, social identity, individual choices, they all play a part. They called for more research, recognizing the complexity rather than sticking rigidly to one interpretation. It suggests the picture is much more nuanced than just situation is everything.
Okay, so the Stanford Prison experiment itself, deeply flawed, hugely controversial, yet undeniably influential. And it clearly had a massive personal impact on Zimbardo. It became the seed for his later broader theory, the Lucifer effect.
Exactly. The SBE experience haunted him, you could say, and pushed him to try and understand this phenomenon on a larger scale. How does this transformation from good to evil actually happen? And this takes us to that fundamental question. How do we even define evil? It's often way more complicated than just finding the bad guy.
And Zimbardo uses a pretty powerful metaphor to frame this, right? The Lucifer analogy.
He does. It's central to his book title and his concept. He draws on the biblical story of Lucifer, supposedly God's favorite angel, the brightest, the most beautiful, who rebels and falls from grace, becoming Satan, the embodiment of evil.
So, the ultimate transformation.
Right. Zimbardo uses it to represent the most extreme transformation imaginable, from the pinnacle of good to the depth of evil. It sets the stage for understanding how similar, though maybe less extreme, transformations can happen to ordinary people. It forces us to look beyond simple labels.
How does he define evil in psychological terms, though? Not just theologically.
He gives a couple of definitions. One is more formal. Evil is the exercise of power to intentionally harm psychologically, physically, or to destroy mortally or spiritually. It's about deliberately using power to inflict suffering through prejudice, dehumanization, torture, killing.
Intentional harm using power.
Okay.
But he also offers a much simpler, maybe even more chilling definition. Evil is knowing better and doing worse. Knowing better and doing worse. That's profound. It suggests it's not always about being inherently monstrous. It can be a choice or a failure to resist, even when you have a sense that it's wrong.
Precisely. It implies awareness, maybe a flicker of conscience that gets overridden. And this leads directly to his core argument, challenging that comforting bad apples idea.
The idea that evil comes from flawed individuals.
Exactly. The theory that evil acts are committed by people who are inherently different from us, sadistic, psychopathic, fundamentally broken. Zimbardo argues forcefully against this, proposing instead the bad barrel hypothesis.
The bad barrel. So the container, not the apples.
Right. His argument is that powerful situational forces and corrupting systems, the barrel itself, can contaminate and spoil even perfectly good apples. The environment, the rules, the pressures within the system are so toxic that they can transform ordinary, decent individuals into perpetrators of evil. It shifts the focus from individual pathology to systemic corruption.
He used that visual analogy too, the Escher drawing, right?
Yeah, the one with the interlocking angels and devils. Depending on whether you focus on the white figures or the black figures, you see a world full of angels or a world full of devils.
So perspective matters.
Hugely. Zimbardo uses it to illustrate how good and evil often coexist, intertwined. What dominates often depends on the situation, the system, the context you're in. It's a reminder that the potential for both exists within systems and within people, and the barrel can heavily influence which one emerges.
And this theory, the Lucifer effect, the bad barrel, it moved dramatically from Zimbardo's Stanford basement simulation to the horrifying reality of the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq. He saw direct parallels when those photos came out.
Oh, absolutely. When those shocking images surfaced in 2004 showing U.S. military personnel humiliating, torturing, abusing Iraqi prisoners, it sent shockwaves everywhere. For Zimbardo, it was like watching his experiment play out again, but for real, and with devastating consequences. He immediately saw direct visual parallels, the hoods, the nakedness, the stress positions, the sexual humiliation echoing the behaviors he'd witnessed, albeit in a less extreme form in his own study decades earlier.
And he didn't just comment from the sidelines. He got directly involved, didn't he?
He did. He became an expert witness for the defense of Sergeant Ivan Chip Frederick, one of the main soldiers charged in the scandal.
Why did he do that? Defend one of the perpetrators.
Because he saw Frederick as a prime example of his good apple in a bad barrel theory. This role gave Zimbardo incredible access to investigation reports, thousands of photos and videos, many far worse than what the public saw, psychological evaluations, and Frederick's own background. It allowed him to apply his hypothesis directly to this real-world atrocity.
And the official narrative at the time, from the Bush administration, the military, was very much the bad apples explanation, wasn't it?
Completely. The immediate reaction was to blame a few bad apples, rogue soldiers acting outside the chain of command, maybe inherently sadistic individuals who slipped through the cracks. It contained the problem, deflected systemic responsibility.
But Zimbardo pushed back hard against that.
Very hard. He argued these weren't inherently bad people, but good soldiers, corrupted by being put in a bad barrel. And his investigation into Chip Frederick seemed to support this. Before Abu Ghraib, Frederick had an exemplary record, described as an all-American patriotic soldier, model citizen, 9 medals for good conduct, service awards.
So a good apple, by all accounts.
Seemingly so. He'd pass all the standard psychological tests, no signs of pre-existing sadism or major psychological issues. He looked like a normal, decent guy put into an impossible situation.
So what was that situation? What were the specific bad barrel conditions at Abu Ghraib that Zimbardo identified?
It was a confluence of horrific factors. First, just like in the SPE, extreme dehumanization and de-individuation. Prisoners were hooded, naked, referred to by numbers or slurs. The worst abuses tended to happen on the night shift, again echoing the SPE, run by Frederick's unit, 4 p.m. to 4 a.m.
Why the night shift? Less supervision.
Less supervision, maybe more stress, fatigue, and the conditions were appalling. These soldiers were working 12-hour shifts 7 days a week for 40 days straight with no breaks. The prison was overcrowded, chaotic, under constant mortar attack, filthy rats, overflowing sewage, extreme stress, sleep deprivation.
And these weren't trained prison guards.
No, that's critical. They were Army reservists, military police primarily trained for combat support, not corrections. Suddenly, they were thrown in charge of over 1,000 prisoners with virtually no training, no clear rules of engagement for prison work, and inadequate supervision. They were completely unprepared and overwhelmed.
And on top of that, there was pressure from above to get intelligence.
Yes, a crucial factor. Zimbardo found evidence that CIA and military intelligence operatives were putting immense pressure on these MPs to soften up detainees for interrogation. They were essentially given unofficial permission, or at least a strong nod, to use harsh methods to break the prisoners before questioning. This created a climate where abuse was implicitly, if not explicitly, sanctioned by higher authorities. It gave them a perceived green light.
So Zimbardo argues the blame doesn't just stop with soldiers like Frederick. It goes way up the chain.
Absolutely. He points to the official military investigation reports by Generals Fay and Jones. Even they concluded that the system was primarily at fault. They identified multiple systemic failures, lack of leadership, poor training, confusing orders, terrible conditions as the main drivers of the abuse. Only 1 factor out of 7 was deemed dispositional.
And Zimbardo even connected it to policies set at the very top.
Yes. He highlights how interrogation techniques involving induced fear, stress positions, sleep deprivation, and enforced nakedness had been approved by Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld for use at Guantanamo Bay. And those techniques migrated to Afghanistan and then Iraq, including Abu Ghraib. This, Zimbardo argues, created an institutional climate where such abusive practices were normalized, effectively creating the bad barrel at the highest levels. The system itself permitted, even encouraged these behaviors.
It's chilling how these patterns seem to echo across different experiments and real-world events. It brings us back to those underlying psychological mechanisms. Milgram's obedience study seems relevant again here.
Definitely. Milgram's work is the other classic pillar demonstrating situational power. Remember, ordinary people were willing to administer apparently lethal electric shocks just because a guy in a lab coat told them to continue. That shocking 65% obedience rate showed how powerful perceived authority can be, how it can make people override their own moral objections in a specific context. The gradual escalation, the diffusion of responsibility, it all plays a part.
And de-individuation, which we talked about with the SBE guards' sunglasses, that seems like a major factor in Abu Ghraib too, with the hoods and the anonymity it provides, both for guards and prisoners.
Absolutely. Zimbardo's own earlier research at NYU showed this effect clearly. He had women deliver shocks to another person. When the women were made anonymous, wearing hoods and baggy coats, they delivered twice as much shock as women who were identifiable, wearing name tags visible. And the anonymous group got more aggressive over time. Anonymity lowered the barrier to aggression.
And this isn't just a lab finding, right? There's cross-cultural evidence too.
Yes, really fascinating anthropological research. Studies looking across 23 different cultures found a strong link between warriors changing their appearance before battle, using masks, paint, uniforms, and their likelihood of engaging in extreme violence like killing, torturing, or mutilating victims.
How strong a link?
Strikingly strong. Warriors who altered their appearance were rated as engaging in such extreme violence in about 90% of cases studied. Those who went into battle without changing their appearance, only about 10% did. That suggests the psychological impact of anonymity and shedding personal identity is a potent factor across cultures in enabling aggression.
So the big takeaway here is that anonymity, uniforms, defined roles, pressure from authority. These situational factors can powerfully disinhibit us, making ordinary people capable of extraordinary cruelty. It really forces us to look beyond blaming individuals and examine the barrels, the environments, and systems that foster such behavior.
Exactly. It's a much less comfortable explanation than simply labeling perpetrators as monsters, because it implies that, under the wrong circumstances, many of us might be capable of similar actions.
Okay, we spent a lot of time in the dark side, exploring how situations can corrupt. But Zimbardo's work, especially in the Lucifer effect, doesn't just leave us there in despair. He offers a counterpoint, a path towards resistance, building on Hannah Arendt's famous idea.
Right. Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, it came from her observations of Adolf Eichmann on trial, the Nazi official who orchestrated logistics for the Holocaust. She was struck by how utterly normal he seemed. Not a foaming-at-the-mouth monster, but a bland bureaucrat, just doing his job, following orders. His evil wasn't grandiose. It was mundane, administrative, terrifyingly ordinary.
Chillingly normal.
Exactly. Zimbardo takes that chilling idea and flips it. He proposes the banality of heroism.
The banality of heroism. So heroes are ordinary too.
That's the core idea. Just as evil can be committed by ordinary people caught in bad systems, heroism isn't the exclusive domain of extraordinary individuals with special gifts or hero genes. Heroes, Zimbardo argues, are often ordinary people who, in a critical moment, make an extraordinary choice. They perform extraordinary deeds, often at great personal risk. It democratizes heroism, makes it accessible, something potentially within all of us.
That's a much more hopeful perspective. So what defines heroism for Zimbardo? What does it actually take to act heroically when things go bad?
He boils it down to two key components. First, taking action when others are passive. The hero is the one who steps up when everyone else is standing by, conforming, or looking away. They break the pattern of inaction.
Okay. Intervention. What's the second thing?
Second, it requires going against the mind-your-own-business norm. It means shifting your focus from being purely egocentric, concerned primarily with yourself, your own safety, your own comfort, to becoming sociocentric.
Sociocentric. Meaning?
Meaning concerned with the well-being of others, of the group, of society, even of strangers. It's about prioritizing the collective good or fundamental values over personal convenience or safety in that crucial moment. That shift from self-focus to other focus is vital.
And he points to real people who embody this, right? Ordinary people who made that shift.
Absolutely. His prime example, connected directly to Abu Ghraib, is Joe Darby.
The whistleblower.
Exactly. The Army reservist who saw those horrific photos on a CD given to him by another soldier. He wasn't a high-ranking officer. He was just another soldier in that bad barrel. But he recognized the abuse was fundamentally wrong, and he made a choice.
A very risky choice.
Immensely risky. He knew he'd face backlash, ostracism, possibly danger. But he anonymously turned the CD over to Army investigators. He did it, in his own words, simply because it was the right thing to do. His action exposed the scandal to the world. but the personal cost was huge. He and his family needed protective custody for years due to threats from people in his own community who saw him as a traitor. That's a profound moral courage.
An incredible example of sociocentric action despite immense personal cost. Any other examples he uses?
He often mentions the iconic image of the lone student, the tank man, standing defiantly in front of that column of tanks in Tiananmen Square in 1989, an unbelievable act of physical courage against overwhelming state power.
Yeah, that image is unforgettable.
Or a more recent example, Wesley Autry, the construction worker in New York City back in 2007. He saw a young man have a seizure and fall onto the subway tracks as a train was approaching.
Oh, wow. What did he do?
With his two young daughters watching from the platform, he jumped down onto the tracks, lay on top of the man, and pressed them both down into the shallow drainage trough between the rails as the train roared over them. Both survived.
Unbelievable bravery. What did he say afterwards?
His quote was simple and powerful: "I did what everyone ought to do." Just like Darby not claiming special status, just acting on a fundamental human impulse to help, seeing it as a basic responsibility, these are ordinary people choosing extraordinary action.
So Zimbardo believes this heroic capacity isn't just random luck. We can actually cultivate it. Foster this heroic imagination.
He strongly believes we can, and we should. He argues we need to actively teach and encourage people, starting with children, to think of themselves as heroes in waiting. Not that they need to perform grand feats daily, but to be mentally prepared, to have thought about what they would do if they witnessed injustice or someone in danger.
So mental preparation is key.
Yes, and practicing everyday heroism. Actively challenging things like bullying, whether it's face-to-face or online cyberbullying. Creating systems in schools and workplaces that have zero tolerance for such behaviors, and, crucially, encourage and protect bystanders who intervene or report it, perhaps anonymously. The idea is to shift the social norm from passive acceptance to active intervention. Make helping the default, not the exception.
It's like recognizing that the same situation that pushes some towards hostility can actually trigger heroism in others.
Exactly. Zimbardo puts it beautifully. The same situation that inflames the hostile imagination will inspire the heroic imagination in others, while, he notes, most people remain passively inactive. The situation provides the crucible, the test, but the reaction isn't predetermined. Both darkness and light can emerge from the same fire.
This also brings us to the bigger picture, the systemic level. If bad barrels are the problem, how do we fix them? Especially in institutions like prisons, which Zimbardo calls a failed experiment.
Yeah, he's very critical of the modern prison system, particularly in the U.S. He points to the huge cost, the massive incarcerated population, and the incredibly high recidivism rates, like 60% of people released are back in prison within 3 years. He argues prisons often function more like universities of crime, hardening inmates, teaching them worse behaviors rather than rehabilitating them.
And systemic issues prevent reform.
Often, yes. He mentions things like powerful prison guards unions, sometimes blocking vocational training programs that could actually help inmates find work and stay out of trouble upon release. He argues we need a fundamental, total system change, moving away from purely punitive models towards approaches focused on rehabilitation, education, mental health treatment, and addressing the social root causes of crime. It's about fixing the barrel, not just dealing with the apples it contains or spoils.
And what about encouraging collective action, not just relying on lone heroes, especially when the system might punish those who step up?
That's a critical piece for fostering heroism. He uses that striking example of the law students taking an exam. A student has a seizure. Only 2 out of 600 helped. And those 2 were penalized because they lost time on their exam.
That's crazy. The system punished them for helping.
Exactly. It shows how systems can inadvertently discourage pro-social behavior. Zimbardo argues we need to redesign systems to promote collective responsibility. In that scenario, maybe the exam should have been stopped for everyone, or the helpers given extra time without penalty. The goal is to create structures where doing the right thing, helping others, is supported and rewarded, not punished. Make heroism the norm, not the risky exception. #risky exception.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today. Started with that fundamental question. Can good people do bad things?
And we saw how the Stanford prison experiment, for all its serious flaws and ethical nightmares, gave us this really stark, if imperfect, glimpse into how profoundly situations and roles can shape us. It really forced psychology, and maybe all of us, to confront the power of context.
Yeah, the idea that our environment matters, maybe much more than we're comfortable admitting. Then Zimbardo expanded that with the Lucifer effect, arguing that these bad barrels, The toxic situations, the corrupt systems, can indeed spoil good apples.
And the parallels he drew with Abu Ghraib were just chillingly powerful illustrations of that theory playing out in the real world, showing how ordinary soldiers, seemingly good people, could become perpetrators under extreme situational and systemic pressure.
But thankfully, it wasn't all darkness. We also explored the flip side, the banality of heroism, that hopeful idea that heroes aren't some special breed. They're ordinary folks like us who make a choice.
Right. People like Joe Darby, Wesley Autry, they remind us that even when faced with immense pressure to conform or when everyone else is looking away, that choice to act courageously, to be sociocentric, to step forward, that potential exists within us too.
It's really fascinating, isn't it? This idea that the capacity for both good and evil, for being the villain or the hero, resides within each of us, and which one emerges seems so heavily influenced by the context, the situation we find ourselves in. As Tennyson said, that line dividing good and evil cuts right through every human heart.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really important question to reflect on. The next time you find yourself witnessing something wrong, maybe bullying, injustice, or even just someone clearly needing help and maybe nobody else is doing anything, what role will you choose to play?
Will you join in? Will you just look away, mind your own business? Or will you be the one to step forward and act? That situation, that call to heroism Zimbardo suggests, might only come once in your life. What will you do?